Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bishop Talk. We are glad that you have joined us for another conversation. And I'm Robert Griffin, the Auxiliary Bishop with the Global Justice Institute, and also the Executive Minister at the Sunshine Cathedral in Fort Lauderdale. Our guest today is not unknown to us. She has been a guest on a previous Bishop Talk, and that is really my former professor, my friend, my mentor, my colleague, and noted author and many publications with the Episcopal Church in our own right, in our own standing, and that is Dr. Kwok Pui Lan. Dr. Kwok, I'm going to let you introduce yourself before we get into our topic about your newest book that is coming out pretty soon. So why don't you introduce yourself again for our audience?
Bishop Robert, this is always good to speak with you, and I look forward to the conversation. For many years, I taught at Episcopal Divinity School. And then in the last couple of years, I had the opportunity of teaching at Kendall School of Theology in Atlanta, Georgia. But right now, I am a distinguished scholar back at GDS again. And during this time, I was helping the school to connect with global partners within the Anglican Communion and even broader in the society and in the ecumenical churches. And I am glad to let you know that I have a couple of writing projects and looking at the Anglican Communion from different perspectives.
When we just bouncing back to our time at EBS, you had already written a lot around postcolonial work and just what it meant to the Episcopal Church, but also to you and your background. Do you want to lead in just about your take on your previous postcolonial work and what it looks like today?
I was born in the former British colony of Hong Kong, and as you know that, Hong Kong was returned from the British to the Chinese in 1997. And a couple of years before that, my colleagues in Hong Kong were talking about preparing from a colonized to a post-colonial society. And as they were talking about post-colonialism, I became very engaged in the studying of post-colonial theory and how it might apply to the understanding of Christian faith. And so I have been involved in introducing post-colonial reflections to the study of the Bible and theology for almost 3 decades.
Recently, I completed a course with the Episcopal Divinity School on the topic we're going to talk about in a minute on Palestine and liberation with Father Fadi. And I thought of you much throughout that course, just from a post-colonial standpoint. What are some of your initial thoughts around getting towards your book that we're going to talk about around Israel and Palestine right now and post-colonial thought and how we can view what's going on there now from our lenses that we're looking at all this that's happening in front of us?
I want to share with you the first time I began thinking about Palestine was when I attended a meeting of the World Council of Churches. And one of the leaders of the Palestinian women by the name of Jean Sarro was sitting next to me during a meal. And she asked me, "Do you know where is West Bank?" And we began talking about her experience as a Palestinian Quaker woman working for justice and peace in that part of the world. And later, when I had the opportunity to visit Jerusalem, I met with the Reverend Naim Atik, who at that time served as a pastor at St. George's Cathedral. So through his work, especially his Palestinian liberation theology, I was thinking about, as a post-colonial theologian, how I may learn from them and also relate it to my own colonized experience in Hong Kong. And that is why I had a maintained relationship, and certainly you mentioned Father Fatigue, who is the rector of St. Andrew's Church in Ramallah, and knowing more about the witness and the ministry of the Anglican Church in Palestine. And of course, the conflict between Israel and Palestinian have been several decades now. And the war in Iran and also the Middle Eastern conflict cannot be separated from the issues of the relationship between Jews and Palestinians. And this is an issue as an Anglican that I have to wrestle with, given the long history of colonization in that part of the world and the mission of the Anglican Church in the Holy Land.
If you ever Google Dr. Kwok Pui Lan's name, you know that she's a noted author. She has several books that are out, and she has a book that's coming out in September. And that book is a groundbreaking collection of essays that will reshape the understanding of Anglicanism history and the influence of Palestine. And so to lead us in that discussion, I want to read you just a brief description that's available about the book, and as we begin our conversation. And in the foreword of the book, it says, the ongoing war in Gaza and the broader Middle Eastern violence is prompting scholars to examine the British Empire's colonial legacy in the region and the role played by the Church of England and the Episcopal Church. The Anglican mission began in Palestine with the creation of the Anglo-Persian Episcopal See in Jerusalem in 1841. And Christian Zionism in England influenced the development of Jewish Zionism and the support of the Balfour Declaration. And yet no book introduces this complex history and brings us to bear on what's happening in today's Palestine until now. Dr. Kwok, let's begin, for a lot of folks who may not know, what is the Anglo-Persian Episcopal See, the creation of that document? Can you give us just a taste of that bit of information?
There have been many different groups of Christians in the Holy Land before Protestant mission began. And you, of course, remember the Orthodox and the Catholics. And then in 1841, the Anglican Church in UK, together with the Prussian Church, joined together to form this Anglo-Prussian mission. Why? It was because France was protecting the Catholics and Russia was protecting the Orthodox. And now they said we needed to protect the Protestants or begin the mission there. And that is why this Anglo-Prussian See, or the diocese, was formed. And later, when the Prussians decided not to join the effort, then it was only the Anglican Church that continued the work there, whereas the Lutherans and other denominations, of course, continue to have their mission work. So in 1841, Protestant mission began in the Holy Land.
And that work continues today. I've seen many of my colleagues and friends from the Episcopal Church, Anglican Union, returning to visit and do work there. How has that work since shifted from 1841 to 2026? With all this given, there seems to be that there is pressure, I want to say, or what seems like humankind pressure for peace. And we continue to somehow miss the mark on landing on peace. How do we eventually get to that peace that is everlasting or sustaining, that really can shift us to the next part, whether from the Jerusalem side or from the Palestine side? How do we get there?
Let me separate this period, 1841 to the present moment, into three different periods. The first period was when it was started, that part of the world was controlled and ruled by the Ottoman Empire. So Christianity, of course, did not have much power. It was under a big empire, the Ottoman Empire. But then the World War I and the situation changed because the Ottoman Empire was no more in the former form. And that is why you have the British mandate ruling over Palestine for a certain period of time. And so the kind of work will be different during the British mandate. And afterwards, of course, the establishment of the State of Israel, 1948, and we enter into a different political situation. So I would say during the different political changes, the fortunes of the church had its up and down. And unfortunately, during the 1948 period, the Palestinians call it Nakba, that is catastrophe, because around 750,000 Palestinians were either expelled or forced to leave their villages, family, and communities. What we have not heard, and that is why Father Fatigue has been very helpful in naming that situation Ecclesia Nakba. It is not only affecting the general population of Palestinians, it also affected the church. because many of those churches during that time, around 48 and subsequent years, they were either destroyed or they could not function. And then many of the Christians were in exile in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, and other places of the world. And so today, the Christian community is very small. In occupied territories, it's less than 1% of the population. And in Israel, it's only 1.9%. And that is why Christians in Palestine are asking the global community to help during this very difficult situation.
For those who are just joining us, we have Dr. Kwok Pui Lan with us today, and we're talking about her book that will be released on September, and it's The Anglican Church in Palestine. As many of us know, we've been watching different things happen around Israel and Palestine. And I think one of the things that piqued my interest when I saw this coming out was, first of all, I know Dr. Kwok, and she's taken on what I would assume is a difficult topic and approach, because there's so many polarization to what's happened in Palestine and in Israel. And as a kid growing up, we've always been either pro this or pro that. But to really take a stab at really bringing to light, I think, some of the information behind the discussion that a lot of us are not aware of, especially the historical context about how some of these things began and where they began and where we are today. So Dr. Kwok, can you maybe even go a little bit deeper in saying the polarization that we see today between Palestinians and Israelis, is that something that we pray for peace again? I go back to the whole peace concept. Is this something that can lead to that discussion, making it better for people who are there or even for our world?
As you may know that during the war in Gaza, Christians in different parts of the world, they have been praying for ceasefire, humanitarian aid, and also how can the global church support the victims of the war and people who are suffering. Of course, the attack on October 2023 against the Israelites is horrendous, a situation and perpetrated by Hamas. But then afterwards, the indiscriminate bombing of Gaza caused global concerns. And by editing this book, I was hoping that we shed some light on how the colonial legacy, that is, all those major empires at that time, they had a part in shaping the Middle East. And today, what are some of those legacies that we need to be aware of? Why UK, or of course the United States, would take the stance as they have taken? Possibly, Robert, you know that the Church of England in its General Synod have adopted a resolution calling for the church to listen to the Palestinian voices. That is very historic, because for a long time, the Church of England was very cautious. Just like churches in the United States have been very cautious. Some, of course, will take a more outspoken stance, but others have been quiet. And so the book hopes to understand the legacy of the colonial past. How did the mission begin? How we may learn from the past so we can work together today in a very conflictual situation for just peace. Because the Palestinians kept on reminding us, peace without justice is really not peace. You need to have justice for Israelis and justice for Palestinians as well.
Yeah. I think a piece of that for me also speaks to the part that we can't really get to true reconciliation without transformation. And a big piece of that transformation is to recognize things on both sides, the harm, the good, and what has gotten us here to get to that part of reconciliation and transformation, and to honor that peace part that we really want to see in that part of the world. Most of us grew up, we've only known of war in the Middle East, if you will. And the moments of peace have been there, but have not always lasted long. So I guess my next question would be is, most people say, I'm not there. That's somewhere else. That's someone else's problem. And I guess, as you kind of mentioned more about, as we contextualize this locally, what are some practical things that maybe local parishes or groups can do to engage in this conversation?
Of course, local congregations can keep on praying for the Middle East, praying for both the Israelis and also for Palestinians. But in addition to prayer, I hope we will get to know more about the history, the struggles of the people there, and to be able to visit through pilgrimage or other learning seminars. And I think it is important to maintain that kind of connection and dialogue. It is not just a place out there for those of us who are Americans, because the U.S. politics have been so intertwined with the situation of Israel. We support it in many ways, financially, militarily, and also other ways, supporting the Israeli government. And so it is very important for Americans to know about our own relationship with Israel, our own connection with Palestinians, and to educate ourselves about the history in that part of the world.
Today, we've been talking with Dr. Kwok Pui Lan, and we're talking about her upcoming book that's to be released through Amazon. It is called The Anglican Church and Palestine. You can actually pre-order your copies now. I've already pre-ordered mine to make sure I get it. But Dr. Kwok, are there three things you want us to know about this book as we wrap up our time together today? Are there three things you want us to know about why this book is important, why someone should have this book in their library or in their church community? What are three things that come to mind for you about why this book is important today?
I was looking for a book like that, or put it simply, why? I was thinking, gee, didn't you remember in October 2023, there was an Al-Ali Arab hospital bombed in the war, and I didn't know about the mission of the church, an Anglican church in Gaza. I knew pretty much nothing about this hospital. So I think the first thing is to know about the history of the Anglican church and its mission in that part of the world from the beginning up to today. So it gives you a long trajectory for understanding the mission, the issues, and the challenges. Second, most folk that talks about Palestine or the relationship between Israelis and Palestinians will focus only on Europe and United States. But this book is different because we have people from Brazil, from Korean, from South African and Australian background to help us look at the issue from a much broader perspective. For example, we can even compare the Episcopal Church, USA's response to the Middle Eastern conflict with Anglican Church in Canada. So it's a much more multifaceted discourse. But most importantly, the book also pointed to practical things about pilgrimage. How are we going to conduct pilgrimage that will be justice-oriented? What are some of the things denominations and local churches can do to promote just peace? And so those are three things, and I hope your audience will be interested in. And I take a lot of pride and a lot of commitment in producing this book. And I thank my collaborators from around the world. 16 of us write for this book.
Thank you. It's always wonderful to share space with you, from the seminary halls to now doing this type of work together. Again, today we've had Dr. Kwok Pui Lan with us, and the book that's coming out is called The Anglican Church and Palestine. Again, I encourage you to pre-order your copy now. It's available through Amazon, and so please do get that. And I want to thank everyone for joining us again here today on Bishop Talk, and I want to especially thank my friend, mentor, and colleague, Dr. Kwok Pui Lan. Any last words for you today before we finish up?
Thank you very much. And I hope your colleagues will see that this book, although not from an MCC, Bishop Robert, your denomination, will be inspiring and enlightening for people from different denominations, because we offer a mirror for other denominations to look at what we have done, what we should have done, and what can be done now.
Thank you. You can find this available on the sunshinecathedral.org website. Again, thank you, Dr. Kwok Pui Lan. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Have a great day.
Thank you.